Captain Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other pilots. At 32, she possessed an uncanny ability to navigate through the most challenging weather conditions and technical failures that would ground even the most experienced aviators. Her colleagues at Morrison International Airport often joked that she could fly blindfolded, but they never questioned her skills when lives were on the line. The morning of March 15th started like any other day. Sarah arrived at the hangar before dawn. Her ritual of checking every bolt, wire, and gauge on her modified Cessna Citation jet had become legendary among the ground crew. The aircraft wasn't just her profession. It was her sanctuary, her escape from a world that often felt too small for her restless spirit. "Another emergency medical transport," announced Tom Bradley, the airport coordinator, as he handed her the flight manifest. A critically injured child in Denver needed immediate transport to a specialized facility in Seattle. Time was running short, and Sarah was the only pilot available who could make the journey in the deteriorating weather conditions. As she prepared for takeoff, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy she couldn't quite identify. The weather reports showed severe thunderstorms developing along her planned route, but Sarah had flown through worse. What concerned her more was the strange electromagnetic readings her instruments were displaying. Numbers that didn't match any weather pattern she had encountered in her 15 years of flying. The takeoff was smooth, and within minutes Sarah was climbing through the gray morning clouds. The child, accompanied by a medical team, was stable but critical. Every minute counted, and Sarah pushed her aircraft to its limits, racing against time and the approaching storm system. About 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the remote wilderness of Montana, Sarah's instruments began behaving erratically. The compass spun wildly, the GPS showed impossible coordinates, and her radio crackled with interference that sounded almost like voices speaking in an unknown language. The storm clouds around her had taken on an unusual greenish hue, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. "Denver Control. This is Citation November 74 Alpha," Sarah called into her radio but received only static in response. She tried different frequencies, but the interference was overwhelming. The medical team behind her remained unaware of the developing situation, focused entirely on their young patient. Then it happened. A brilliant flash of light engulfed the aircraft, brighter than anything Sarah had ever experienced. The sensation was indescribable, as if she was being pulled through a tunnel of pure energy. Her last conscious thought before everything went dark was wondering if this was what it felt like to be struck by lightning, though she knew no lightning could produce such an effect. When consciousness slowly returned, Sarah found herself in complete darkness. The familiar hum of her jet engines was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press against her eardrums. She tried to move but felt strangely weightless, as if floating in space. Her attempts to speak produced no sound, and gradually the terrifying realization dawned on her that she might no longer exist in any conventional sense. Time became meaningless in this void. Sarah couldn't tell if she had been unconscious for minutes, hours, or days. Occasionally she would see flashes of images that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely, glimpses of places and people she had never seen before. Sometimes she could hear voices, distant and distorted, speaking about search efforts and missing aircraft. The search for Citation. November 74 Alpha began immediately when Sarah failed to respond to radio calls. Military satellites, civilian aircraft, and ground teams combed the wilderness where her last known position had been recorded. The weather had cleared, but no trace of the aircraft could be found. It was as if the jet and its occupants had simply vanished from existence. For the families involved, the disappearance became a nightmare with no resolution. Sarah's sister Rebecca refused to accept that her sister was gone. She organized search parties, hired private investigators, and pushed authorities to expand their efforts. The parents of the sick child clung to hope that somehow, miraculously, their daughter might still be alive somewhere. Aviation experts were baffled. Modern aircraft don't simply disappear without leaving some trace, especially in well-monitored airspace. The electromagnetic anomalies recorded in the area that day became the subject of intense study, but no satisfactory explanation emerged. Some theorized about unknown atmospheric phenomena, while others suggested more exotic possibilities that mainstream science wasn't ready to accept. As weeks turned to months, the official search was gradually scaled back and eventually suspended. The families held memorial services, insurance claims were processed, and the aviation industry implemented new tracking protocols to prevent similar disappearances. But questions remained, and for those who knew Sarah best, the mystery felt far from over. In the hangar where Sarah's backup aircraft was stored, strange things began to happen. Mechanics reported instruments activating by themselves, displaying the same erratic readings that Sarah had experienced on her final flight. Security cameras captured unexplained lights moving through the sealed building, and several workers claimed to hear the sound of jet engines running when no aircraft were present. The hangar was eventually sealed and declared off-limits, but the phenomena continued. Local residents began reporting unusual lights in the sky near the airport, always appearing over the sealed hangar. Scientists who investigated found elevated electromagnetic readings in the area, but could offer no explanation for their source or significance. What no one realized was that somewhere in the space between worlds, Sarah Mitchell was still fighting to return home. Her disappearance was not an end, but a beginning of something far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The sealed hangar would soon become the focal point of events that would challenge everything people thought they knew about the nature of reality itself. Detective Marcus Webb had seen his share of unusual cases during his 20-year career with the state police. But the disappearance of Sarah Mitchell's aircraft bothered him in ways he couldn't articulate. While aviation incidents typically fell under federal jurisdiction, the strange circumstances surrounding the case had drawn local law enforcement into what was becoming one of the most puzzling mysteries in regional history. 3 months after the disappearance, Webb found himself standing in the sealed hangar at Morrison International Airport, studying reports that made him question his own sanity. Security footage showed lights moving through the building when it was supposedly empty and locked. Electronic equipment was activating without power sources, and multiple witnesses had reported hearing aircraft engines running inside the sealed structure. It started about 6 weeks after the plane went missing, explained Jake Morrison, the airport owner, whose family had operated the facility for 3 generations. At first we thought someone was breaking in, but the building remained sealed. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. Just these lights and sounds that happen almost every night. Webb examined the hangar's security system, which was more sophisticated than most banks. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and magnetic locks all confirmed the same impossible story. Something was moving around inside the building. But according to every detection system, nothing living had entered or left the structure since it was sealed. The electromagnetic readings were particularly disturbing. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a physicist from the nearby university, had been monitoring the anomalies for weeks. Her equipment showed energy patterns that defied conventional understanding, fluctuating in ways that seemed almost purposeful, as if responding to some unknown intelligence. These readings are unlike anything in the scientific literature, Dr. Vasquez explained to Webb as they reviewed her data. The energy signatures are complex, organized, and they appear to be strengthening over time. Whatever is causing this phenomenon, it's not natural, and it's not random. Webb's investigation revealed that similar electromagnetic anomalies had been recorded along Sarah's flight path on the day she disappeared. Satellite data showed unusual atmospheric disturbances that moved in patterns inconsistent with known weather phenomena. Military radar operators reported brief contacts that appeared and vanished without explanation, always in areas where the electromagnetic readings were strongest. The families of the missing passengers had formed a support group, meeting weekly to share information and coordinate their own search efforts. Rebecca Mitchell had become their unofficial leader, driven by an unshakable belief that her sister was still alive somewhere. Her determination had uncovered details that official investigators had missed or dismissed. Sarah left me a voicemail the night before her last flight, Rebecca told Webb during one of their meetings. She sounded excited about something. Mentioned strange dreams she'd been having about flying through stars. I thought she was just stressed from work, but now I wonder if she somehow knew something was going to happen. The voicemail had been analyzed by audio experts, but the quality was too poor to reveal any hidden details. However, the timestamp showed it was recorded at exactly 3:17 a.m., which became significant when investigators discovered that the hangar phenomena always peaked at that same time each night. Webb began spending nights at the airport, hoping to witness the anomalies firsthand. On his 3rd overnight vigil, he finally experienced what dozens of others had reported: At precisely 3:17 a.m., the sealed hangar began to glow with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves. The sound began moments later, a low humming that gradually built into the unmistakable roar of jet engines, but these weren't the sounds of any aircraft Webb had ever heard. The pitch and rhythm were subtly wrong, as if filtered through some medium that distorted their fundamental characteristics. His radio equipment, which had been functioning normally, suddenly filled with static and interference. Through the crackling noise, he could swear he heard fragments of human voices, desperately trying to communicate something urgent. The voices faded in and out like signals from an impossibly distant source. Dr. Vasquez's monitoring equipment went wild during these episodes, recording energy spikes that should have been impossible with the electrical systems in the area. The pattern suggested some kind of controlled discharge, as if the energy was being deliberately focused and directed from somewhere beyond normal space. The Federal Aviation Authority had officially closed the case, citing insufficient evidence to continue the investigation, but Webb knew they were missing something crucial. The pattern of anomalies, the timing of the phenomena, and the specific location all pointed to a connection with Sarah's disappearance that went beyond coincidence. Local newspapers had begun calling it the ghost hangar phenomenon, attracting curiosity seekers and paranormal investigators from across the country. The airport's management was considering demolishing the building, concerned about the negative publicity and the strain on their security resources. But Webb convinced them to wait, sensing that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. His years of police work had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct told him that Sarah Mitchell was somehow trying to communicate with them through these supernatural manifestations. The breakthrough came when Rebecca discovered her sister's personal journal, hidden in Sarah's apartment behind a false panel she had installed years earlier. The final entries described vivid dreams of flying through dimensional barriers, encountering intelligences from other realities, and learning to navigate spaces that existed between worlds. She wrote about feeling called to something greater, Rebecca explained to Webb as they read the journal together. She believed that her flying abilities were preparing her for some kind of mission that would take her beyond normal reality. I thought it was just fantasy, but now, the journal's final entry, dated the day before Sarah's disappearance, contained detailed sketches of energy patterns that precisely matched Dr. Vasquez's electromagnetic readings. Sarah had somehow anticipated the phenomenon that would later manifest in the hangar, drawing diagrams of forces and dimensions that mainstream science was only beginning to acknowledge. Webb realized they weren't dealing with a simple missing person case or even a conventional aircraft accident. Something far more extraordinary was happening, something that challenged basic assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Sarah Mitchell hadn't simply vanished. She had somehow crossed into another realm of existence, and she was trying to find her way back. The investigation was about to take a turn that would change everyone involved, forcing them to confront possibilities that would reshape their understanding of life, death, and the mysterious spaces that existed between all known worlds. The breakthrough came on a cold Thursday evening in late October, exactly 7 months after Sarah's disappearance. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been working late in her makeshift laboratory at the airport, fine-tuning her equipment to better detect the electromagnetic patterns that had become her obsession. The readings had been growing stronger each week, and she suspected they were building toward some kind of climax. At 3:17 a.m., as had become routine, the phenomena began. But this time was different. Instead of the usual chaotic static and fragmented voices, the radio equipment began receiving what sounded like a coherent transmission. Dr. Vasquez frantically adjusted her recording devices as a familiar voice emerged from the interference. "This is Captain Sarah Mitchell. Citation November 74 Alpha. Can anyone hear me? I've been trying to reach you for months. The barriers are weakening, and I think I've found a way to communicate across the dimensional boundary." The transmission lasted only 30 seconds before dissolving back into static, but it was enough to confirm what Rebecca had insisted all along. Sarah was alive somewhere, somehow, and she was actively trying to make contact with their reality. Detective Webb arrived within minutes of Dr. Vasquez's emergency call, finding the physicist pale and shaking as she replayed the recorded message. The voice analysis software confirmed what their hearts already knew. This was definitely Sarah Mitchell, though her voice carried strange harmonics that suggested she was speaking from an environment that fundamentally altered sound waves. "We need to establish regular communication," Dr. Vasquez explained, her scientific excitement overriding her exhaustion. "The electromagnetic conditions that allow these transmissions are predictable. If we can amplify our equipment and focus it on the right frequencies, we might be able to talk to her consistently." The next few days saw a flurry of activity at the airport. Dr. Vasquez brought in colleagues from the university's physics department, while Webb coordinated with federal authorities who had suddenly renewed their interest in the case. The sealed hangar was opened for the first time in months, revealing an interior that defied explanation. The aircraft that had been stored inside were covered with a fine, crystalline dust that glowed faintly in the darkness. The substance appeared to be some kind of exotic matter that didn't match any known element. When analyzed, it showed properties that suggested it existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that current physics couldn't adequately describe. More importantly, the hangar's interior now contained geometric patterns etched into the concrete floor, complex mathematical equations that described forces and relationships between multiple dimensions. The equations were written in Sarah's handwriting, though how they had appeared in a sealed building remained a mystery. "She's been here," Rebecca whispered as she recognized her sister's distinctive mathematical notation. Sarah had always been gifted with numbers, able to visualize complex calculations in ways that amazed her instructors. These equations, however, were far beyond anything taught in conventional aviation or engineering programs. Dr. Vasquez spent hours photographing and analyzing the equations, recognizing elements of theoretical physics that were still considered highly speculative. The mathematics described methods for manipulating space-time, creating stable passages between parallel dimensions, and maintaining consciousness while existing in multiple realities simultaneously. The communication attempts that followed were sporadic, but increasingly successful. Sarah's voice came through more clearly each night, and she began sharing details about her incredible journey. She described being pulled into what she called the spaces between worlds during that electromagnetic storm, finding herself in a realm where consciousness could exist without physical form. "I'm not dead," Sarah's voice crackled through the radio equipment one night, "but I'm not fully alive in the way you understand it either. I exist in a state between dimensions, able to observe multiple realities but unable to fully interact with any of them. The child I was transporting, the medical team, they're here with me, safe but displaced." This revelation brought both relief and new urgency to the situation. If Sarah and the others were alive but trapped in some interdimensional space, there might be a way to bring them home. The equations in the hangar suggested that Sarah had been learning how to navigate this strange realm, possibly working toward a solution. "The beings here call themselves the Guardians," Sarah explained during another transmission. "They exist between dimensions by choice, monitoring the boundaries between realities. They've been teaching me about the nature of consciousness and the flexibility of what you call physical laws. They say I have a unique ability to bridge different states of existence." The Guardians, according to Sarah, were not supernatural entities but rather evolved beings who had transcended the limitations of single-dimensional existence. They had been observing humanity's technological development, particularly interested in individuals who showed natural ability to perceive beyond conventional reality. "They've been waiting for someone like me," Sarah continued, "a consciousness capable of learning their methods and serving as a bridge between our world and theirs. They say humanity is approaching a crucial stage in its development, where understanding multiple dimensions will become necessary for survival." Dr. Vasquez's equipment had evolved considerably, now filling most of the hangar with arrays of sensors, amplifiers, and recording devices. The federal government had classified the entire operation, bringing in teams of specialists who worked around the clock to understand the phenomenon and establish more reliable communication. The implications were staggering. If Sarah had indeed made contact with interdimensional beings, it would represent the most significant discovery in human history. The equations she had somehow inscribed in the hangar were already being studied by theoretical physicists around the world, opening new avenues of research into the fundamental nature of reality. But the personal stakes remained just as important as the scientific ones. Rebecca and the other families wanted their loved ones back, not just confirmation that they existed somewhere beyond normal space and time. Sarah seemed to understand this urgency. and her transmissions increasingly focused on practical methods for returning to their home dimension. "I think I've learned enough," Sarah announced during a particularly clear transmission in early December. "The Guardians have taught me how to navigate dimensional boundaries, but more importantly, they've shown me how to bring others across those boundaries safely. I'm going to attempt a return, but I'll need your help to anchor the passage on your side." The plan Sarah outlined was complex and dangerous, requiring precise coordination between her efforts in the interdimensional space and the equipment Dr. Vasquez had assembled in the hangar. The electromagnetic fields would need to be carefully controlled to create a stable passage, while everyone involved would be exposing themselves to forces that could potentially tear apart the fabric of local spacetime. But after 8 months of separation, everyone was willing to take the risk. Sarah Mitchell was coming home, and she was bringing knowledge that would change humanity's understanding of existence itself. The sealed hangar was about to become the site of an event that would mark a new chapter in the story of human consciousness and its relationship with the infinite cosmos beyond visible reality. The preparation for Sarah's return attempt required resources and expertise that stretched far beyond what Dr. Vasquez and Detective Webb could provide alone. Within days of Sarah's announcement, the hangar at Morrison International Airport had been transformed into something resembling a science fiction movie set, filled with equipment that represented the cutting edge of theoretical physics and electromagnetic manipulation. Dr. James Crawford, a quantum physicist from MIT, arrived with a team of specialists who had been quietly researching dimensional theory for the past decade. Their work, funded by a classified government program, had been largely theoretical until now. Sarah's communications provided the first practical evidence that their mathematical models might actually describe real phenomena. "What we're attempting has never been done before," Dr. Crawford explained to the assembled team during their first planning meeting. "We're essentially trying to create a stable wormhole between our dimension and whatever realm Sarah currently occupies. The energy requirements are enormous, and the margin for error is essentially zero." The equations Sarah had inscribed in the hangar floor became the foundation for their calculations. Her mathematical descriptions of interdimensional forces provided crucial insights that filled gaps in their theoretical models. It became clear that Sarah's time with the Guardians had given her knowledge that humanity was decades away from discovering. Independently, Rebecca Mitchell found herself at the CAO center of preparations that seemed to blur the line between cutting-edge science and something approaching magic. Her sister's voice came through the radio equipment nightly now, providing technical specifications and coordinates for the return attempt with a precision that astounded the physicists. "The passage point needs to be exactly 17 feet above the geometric center of the inscribed patterns," Sarah's voice instructed during one of their planning sessions. "The electromagnetic field generators must be synchronized to create a resonance frequency of 432.8 Hz, modulated at intervals that match the dimensional boundary fluctuations." The technical requirements were staggering. Massive power generators were brought in to supply the energy needed for the attempt. The local electrical grid was reinforced to handle the unprecedented load. Military-grade electromagnetic shielding was installed to protect the surrounding area from the forces they were about to unleash. But perhaps the most challenging aspect was the timing. Sarah explained that dimensional boundaries fluctuated according to complex patterns that were influenced by solar activity, planetary alignments, and electromagnetic fields generated by Earth's core. The optimal window for their attempt would last only 18 minutes, occurring once every few months when all the necessary conditions aligned. "The next opportunity is December 21st, Sarah informed them. "The winter solstice creates a natural electromagnetic minimum that will make it easier to establish the passage. But we'll only get one chance. If something goes wrong, the dimensional barriers will strengthen, and I might not be able to attempt another crossing for years." The pressure was immense. Families who had waited 9 months for news of their loved ones watched as scientists worked around the clock to prepare equipment that existed at the very limits of human understanding. The media attention was overwhelming. Despite government attempts to maintain secrecy around the operation, Dr. Vasquez had become the primary liaison with Sarah, spending hours each night in communication as they refined the technical details. The physicist found herself learning about aspects of reality that challenged everything she thought she knew about physics and consciousness. Sarah described the space between dimensions as being fluid rather than solid, Dr. Vasquez explained to her colleagues. Consciousness can move through it like swimming through water, but physical matter requires specific frequencies and energy patterns to maintain coherence. She's learned to navigate by manipulating her own electromagnetic field. The equipment they assembled represented the most sophisticated electromagnetic manipulation system ever created. Arrays of field generators were positioned according to the geometric patterns in the hangar, creating a three-dimensional matrix capable of bending space-time in localized areas. The power requirements were so enormous that they had to coordinate with the regional electrical authority to avoid overloading the entire power grid. Safety protocols were established for the dozens of personnel who would be present during the attempt. Everyone within a half-mile radius would need to evacuate during the actual procedure, as the electromagnetic fields could potentially interfere with pacemakers, electronic devices, and even cellular function in sensitive individuals. Detective Webb found his role shifting from investigator to coordinator, managing the complex logistics of an operation that involved federal agencies, university research teams, and civilian contractors. The legal implications alone were staggering, as they were essentially attempting to violate known laws of physics in a populated area. This goes far beyond a rescue operation, Webb realized as he watched technicians install the final pieces of equipment. If Sarah succeeds in returning, it will prove that reality is far more complex and malleable than anyone imagined. The implications for technology, transportation, even basic philosophy are incalculable. The medical team stood ready to treat anyone who emerged from the dimensional passage. Sarah had warned that the transition between realities could be physically traumatic, potentially causing disorientation, memory loss, or cellular damage. Specialized equipment had been brought in to monitor vital signs and provide immediate treatment for conditions that medical science had never encountered before. As December 21st approached, the tension in the hangar became almost palpable. Sarah's nightly communications took on an increasingly urgent tone as she described her final preparations in the interdimensional space. The Guardians, she reported, were supportive of her return attempt but warned that success would fundamentally alter the relationship between their realm and human reality. They've shown me things about the nature of consciousness that will change how humanity understands itself, Sarah explained during one of her final preparation calls. The knowledge I'm bringing back will accelerate human development by centuries, but it also comes with enormous responsibility. We'll be opening a door that can never be fully closed. The night before the attempt, Rebecca stood alone in the hangar, surrounded by humming equipment and the soft glow of status lights. The mathematical patterns her sister had inscribed in the floor seemed to pulse with their own inner light, as if responding to the approaching climax of months of preparation. Tomorrow we find out if the impossible is just another word for something we haven't understood yet, Rebecca whispered to herself, knowing that within hours, they would either witness the greatest triumph in human history or the most spectacular failure ever attempted. The stage was set for an event that would challenge every assumption about the nature of reality, consciousness, and humanity's place in a cosmos far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had dared to imagine. Sarah Mitchell was coming home, and she was bringing knowledge that would change the world forever. December 21st dawned gray and cold, with an unusual atmospheric pressure that made the air feel thick and charged with potential energy. The electromagnetic readings around Morrison International Airport had been fluctuating wildly since midnight, as if reality itself was preparing for the unprecedented event about to unfold. Dr. Vasquez arrived at the hangar before sunrise, finding her equipment already humming with activity. The automated systems had detected the beginning of the dimensional window Sarah had predicted, and the massive electromagnetic field generators were starting their careful synchronization process. Every gauge and monitor confirmed what the mathematics had predicted. Conditions were perfect for the attempt. Electromagnetic coherence at 92% and rising, Dr. Crawford announced as his team ran final diagnostics on their equipment. Power systems are stable, and we're tracking the dimensional frequency fluctuations exactly as Sarah described them. We're as ready as we'll ever be. The hangar had been cleared of all non-essential personnel, leaving only the core team of scientists, medical staff, and emergency responders. Rebecca Mitchell stood at the observation station, wearing protective gear that made her look like an astronaut preparing for a journey to an alien world. In many ways, that's exactly what they were all doing. Sarah's voice came through the communication system with unprecedented clarity as the dimensional barriers began to thin. Her words carried an excitement and determination that had sustained her through 9 months of existence in a realm beyond human comprehension. "I can see the passage point forming," Sarah reported. "The Guardians are helping me navigate to the exact coordinates we established. The others are with me. The medical team and little Emma are all prepared for the transition. We're going to come through together, but you need to maintain the field stability for at least 15 minutes to ensure everyone makes it safely." The energy requirements were staggering. As the electromagnetic field generators reached full power, the local electrical grid strained under a load that equaled the consumption of a small city. The air in the hangar began to shimmer with visible distortions, as if heat waves were rising from invisible fires scattered throughout the space. At exactly 3:17 p.m., the moment Sarah had calculated as optimal, the phenomenon began. A point of light appeared 17 feet above the geometric center of the inscribed patterns, growing from a pinprick to a sphere of brilliant energy that hurt to look at directly. The light wasn't quite white, but rather a color that seemed to exist beyond the normal spectrum of human vision. "Dimensional aperture forming," Dr. Vasquez announced, her voice tight with concentration as she monitored the energy patterns. "Field stability is holding at acceptable parameters. Sarah, we can see the passage opening on our side." The sphere of light began to elongate, stretching into what could only be described as a tunnel of pure energy suspended in midair. Through the swirling luminescence, shadows began to move, vague human shapes that gradually became more distinct as they approached the opening to normal reality. "I can see you," Sarah's voice called out, no longer filtered through radio equipment but actually echoing through the air of the hangar. "The transition is starting. Whatever happens, don't let the field collapse until everyone is through." The first figure to emerge from the dimensional tunnel was Sarah herself, though she looked dramatically changed by her months in the interdimensional space. Her hair had developed silver streaks that seemed to move with their own inner light, and her eyes held a depth of knowledge that spoke of experiences beyond normal human understanding. She materialized slowly, as if her consciousness was rebuilding her physical form from pure energy. The process was beautiful and terrifying to watch, reality itself bending to accommodate the return of someone who had learned to exist partially outside its normal boundaries. Behind Sarah came the medical team members, Dr. Patricia Hayes and Nurse Michael Torres, both looking disoriented but intact. Their emergence was followed by the child they had been transporting, 6-year-old Emma Rodriguez, who appeared to be in perfect health despite her months-long absence from conventional medical care. But as the last figures emerged from the tunnel, something went wrong. The electromagnetic field generators began to overload, their safety systems triggering automatic shutdowns to prevent catastrophic equipment failure. The energy sphere that maintained the dimensional passage started to destabilize, its perfect form beginning to collapse inward. Field coherence dropping rapidly. Dr. Crawford shouted over the growing whine of overloaded equipment. "We're losing containment. Everyone needs to clear the emergent zone immediately." Sarah, still partially suspended between dimensions, realized what was happening. Instead of stepping fully into normal reality, she turned back toward the collapsing passage, using abilities she had learned from the Guardians to stabilize the dimensional aperture through sheer force of will. "Get them out of here," she called to the rescue teams. "The passage is going to implode and anyone nearby could be pulled back through." The medical teams rushed forward to evacuate the returned passengers while Sarah fought to maintain the dimensional stability long enough for everyone to reach safety. Her form began to flicker, between solid and translucent as she drew on reserves of interdimensional energy that pushed her consciousness to its absolute limits. Rebecca watched in horror as her sister seemed to be fading away again, caught between the collapsing passage and normal reality. "Sarah, come back. Don't sacrifice yourself to save the equipment." But Sarah was beyond hearing normal voices now, locked in a battle with forces that existed beyond human comprehension. The tunnel of light began to contract rapidly, its brilliant illumination starting to fade as the connection between dimensions weakened. In a final desperate effort, Sarah released all the interdimensional energy she had accumulated during her time with the Guardians, channeling it into one last stabilization of the passage. The effort allowed the medical teams to complete their evacuation, But it also caused something unprecedented to happen to the hangar itself. The building became saturated with interdimensional energy, its very structure infused with forces that existed partially outside normal space-time. The concrete walls began to glow with the same inner light that had marked Sarah's return, and the geometric patterns in the floor expanded, etching themselves into the walls and ceiling in complex fractals that seemed to extend into invisible dimensions. As the dimensional passage finally collapsed, Sarah fell to her knees in the center of the pattern, her physical form solid once again but forever changed by her experience. The hangar had been transformed into something that was part normal building and part interdimensional gateway, a permanent bridge between realities that would continue to manifest unusual phenomena for years to come. "The passage is closed," Dr. Vasquez announced, her instruments showing rapidly returning normal readings, but the structural changes to the hangar appear to be permanent. "Sarah has somehow anchored a piece of the interdimensional space in our reality." Sarah looked up at her sister with eyes that held the wisdom of beings who existed beyond time and space. Her return was complete, but it had fundamentally altered both her and the place where she had chosen to re-enter normal reality. The impossible had become possible, and the world would never be quite the same again. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's return was a whirlwind of medical examinations, government debriefings, and scientific analysis that stretched on for weeks. The 4 returned individuals were taken to a specialized facility where teams of doctors, physicists, and psychologists worked around the clock to understand the effects of their interdimensional journey. Physically, all 4 appeared to be in remarkable health. Little Emma Rodriguez showed no signs of the medical condition that had originally required emergency transport, leading doctors to theorize that exposure to interdimensional forces had somehow healed her completely. The medical team members, Dr. Hayes and Nurse Torres, displayed enhanced cognitive abilities and an intuitive understanding of electromagnetic phenomena that hadn't existed before their disappearance. But it was Sarah who showed the most dramatic changes. Her DNA had been subtly altered at the quantum level, incorporating patterns that allowed her cells to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. She could perceive electromagnetic fields directly, navigate by sensing gravitational distortions, and most remarkably, maintain limited communication with the Guardians who remained in the interdimensional space. "The human consciousness is far more adaptable than we ever realized," Dr. Crawford explained to the assembled researchers. "Sarah's brain scans show new neural pathways that shouldn't be possible according to current neuroscience. She's essentially developed new senses that allow her to perceive aspects of reality that the rest of us can't even detect." The hangar at Morrison International Airport had become a scientific curiosity in its own right. The building now existed partially in normal space and partially in the interdimensional realm, creating a permanent gateway that allowed for continued research into the nature of multiple realities. Scientists from around the world requested access to study the phenomenon, turning the small regional airport into an unlikely center of theoretical physics research. Rebecca found herself serving as Sarah's advocate and interpreter as her sister struggled to communicate experiences that had no equivalent in human language. The concepts Sarah had learned from the Guardians required new vocabulary and mathematical frameworks that the scientific community was scrambling to develop. She tries to explain what it was like existing between dimensions, Rebecca told Detective Webb during one of their regular meetings. She says consciousness is like water that can flow through containers of different shapes, and that what we call reality is just one particular container. The Guardians exist in a state where they can move between containers at will. The implications for human understanding were staggering. Sarah's knowledge suggested that consciousness was not produced by the brain, but rather channeled through it, meaning that death might not be the absolute end that science had always assumed. The Guardians, according to Sarah, were beings who had learned to maintain their consciousness even after their original physical forms had ceased to exist. Government agencies struggled with how to handle the revelations that emerged from Sarah's debriefings. The technology implications alone were revolutionary, promising advances in energy generation, transportation, and communication that could transform human civilization within decades. But the philosophical and religious implications were equally profound, challenging fundamental assumptions about the nature of Existence itself, the interdimensional equations that Sarah had inscribed in the hangar, were being studied by mathematical theorists who found them to be internally consistent but describing relationships that extended far beyond current human knowledge. The equations suggested methods for manipulating gravity, accessing unlimited energy sources, and even achieving what could only be described as controlled time travel. We're looking at a complete paradigm shift in human understanding, Dr. Vasquez explained to a classified government committee. Sarah has brought back knowledge that represents hundreds of years of scientific advancement, compressed into practical formulas. The question isn't whether this information is valuable, but whether humanity is ready for the responsibility that comes with it. The families of the returned passengers struggled with their own adjustments. Emma Rodriguez's parents found themselves dealing with a child who could predict weather patterns with uncanny accuracy and seemed to understand complex scientific concepts that she had never been taught. The medical team members had similar experiences, discovering abilities that made their colleagues both fascinated and slightly uncomfortable. Sarah herself became increasingly isolated as the full extent of her transformation became apparent. She could no longer relate to normal human concerns in the same way. Her consciousness permanently expanded to encompass awareness of multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Simple activities like watching television or reading books became difficult, because her enhanced perception made her acutely aware of the electromagnetic fields generated by electronic devices. I feel like I'm living with one foot in each world, Sarah confided to Rebecca during one of their private conversations. I can see the beauty and complexity of normal human life, but I'm also constantly aware of the vast cosmic structures that exist beyond what people can perceive. It's incredibly lonely. The hangar continued to manifest unusual phenomena, though they were more controlled now than during the chaotic period following Sarah's return. Researchers had learned to predict and work with the dimensional fluctuations, using them to conduct experiments that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Strange reports began emerging from around the world of people experiencing similar phenomena to what had originally marked Sarah's disappearance. Pilots reported encounters with mysterious lights and electromagnetic anomalies, while sensitive individuals began having dreams about beings of light who spoke of humanity's approaching transition to a new level of consciousness. The Guardians are making contact with other humans, Sarah explained to the research team. My return opened a permanent communication channel between dimensions. They're selecting individuals who show the potential to serve as bridges between realities, preparing for what they call the great expansion of human consciousness. The government faced the challenge of how much information to release to the public. The scientific discoveries were too significant to suppress entirely, but the full implications could cause social and religious upheaval on a global scale. A careful plan was developed to gradually introduce the concepts through controlled disclosure, allowing humanity time to adjust to the new understanding of reality. Meanwhile, Sarah worked with the research teams to develop practical applications of interdimensional technology. The first breakthrough was a communication system that could transmit messages instantaneously across any distance by routing them through interdimensional space. The second was an energy generation method that tapped into the fundamental forces that held multiple dimensions together. But perhaps the most significant development was Sarah's success in training other humans to perceive interdimensional phenomena. Using meditation techniques taught by the Guardians, she found that certain individuals could develop limited abilities to sense electromagnetic fields and even briefly communicate with consciousness. Existing in other dimensional states were not just dealing with advanced technology, Sarah explained to Rebecca as they stood in the transformed hangar. Watching technicians work with equipment that seemed to respond to thought as much as to physical manipulation, we're witnessing the next stage of human evolution. The Guardians have been waiting for us to develop enough to handle this knowledge, and now we're ready to join the larger community of conscious beings that exists throughout the cosmos. The little girl who had originally needed emergency medical transport had become the first in a new generation of humans born with natural, interdimensional awareness. Emma Rodriguez could see patterns and connections that adults had to learn through intense training, suggesting that consciousness itself was evolving to accommodate the expanded reality that Sarah had revealed. The world was changing in ways both subtle and profound. and the transformed hangar stood as a monument to the moment when humanity had crossed the threshold from a single-dimensional species to one capable of existing across multiple states of reality simultaneously. 5 years after Sarah Mitchell's impossible return, the world had quietly transformed in ways that most people were only beginning to understand. The official story released to the public spoke of breakthrough discoveries in electromagnetic theory and consciousness research. But those who knew the full truth realized they were witnessing the dawn of a new era in human evolution. The hangar at Morrison International Airport had become the headquarters of the Interdimensional Research Institute, a facility that attracted the brightest minds from around the globe. The building itself continued to exist partially in multiple dimensions, allowing researchers to conduct experiments that would have been impossible anywhere else on Earth. Sarah had evolved far beyond her original transformation, becoming humanity's first true interdimensional ambassador. She could now shift her consciousness between realities at will, spending weeks at a time in the realm of the Guardians, before returning to share new knowledge with the research teams. Her physical form had stabilized into something that appeared completely human but functioned according to principles that transcended normal biology. The Guardians have been preparing us for contact with a much larger community, Sarah explained to a gathering of world leaders during a classified briefing. Humanity is about to be invited to join what they call the Conscious Collective, a network of evolved beings that spans thousands of dimensions and countless civilizations. The technology that emerged from Sarah's ongoing communications with the Guardians had begun to reshape human society in fundamental ways. Clean energy generation through dimensional tapping had solved the global climate crisis virtually overnight. Medical treatments based on consciousness manipulation could heal conditions that had been considered incurable for centuries. Transportation systems that utilized interdimensional space allowed instantaneous travel between any 2 points on Earth. But perhaps the most significant changes were occurring in human consciousness itself. The meditation techniques Sarah had learned from the Guardians were being taught to selected individuals around the world, creating a growing population of humans who could perceive multiple dimensional states. These enhanced individuals formed the foundation of humanity's preparation for joining the larger cosmic community. Detective Webb, now serving as Director of Security for the Institute, marveled at how quickly humanity was adapting to concepts that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Children like Emma Rodriguez, who had been exposed to interdimensional forces at a young age, were developing abilities that surpassed even Sarah's initial capabilities. Emma can communicate directly with consciousness existing in other dimensions, Dr. Vasquez reported during a recent evaluation. She doesn't need the technological interfaces that the rest of us require. Her brain has developed neural pathways that function as natural interdimensional transceivers. The little girl who had once needed emergency medical transport was now leading seminars on consciousness expansion for graduate students in theoretical physics. Her childlike wonder at the infinite complexity of existence had become a teaching tool that helped adults overcome their preconceptions about the nature of reality. Rebecca Mitchell had become Sarah's primary liaison with normal human society, helping to interpret and implement the revolutionary concepts her sister brought back from each interdimensional journey. The sisters' relationship had deepened despite the vast differences in their perceptual abilities, proving that love and family bonds could transcend even the boundaries between dimensions. Sarah is still my sister, Rebecca explained to a documentary filmmaker who was creating a record of humanity's transformation. She may exist partially in other realities now, but the core of who she is remains unchanged. If anything, her expanded consciousness has made her more compassionate and understanding than she ever was before. The Guardians had begun making more direct contact with selected humans, appearing in meditation sessions and dreams to provide guidance on humanity's transition to interdimensional awareness. Their message was consistent. Consciousness was the fundamental force of the universe, and beings who learned to master their conscious abilities could transcend the limitations of single-dimensional existence. Religious and philosophical institutions worldwide struggled to incorporate these revelations into their existing frameworks. Some embraced the discoveries as confirmation of ancient spiritual teachings about the soul's eternal nature, while others found their fundamental beliefs challenged by the evidence that consciousness could exist independently of physical form. The hangar had become a pilgrimage site for people seeking to understand the new reality that was emerging. Visitors often reported profound spiritual experiences while standing in the space where Sarah had first returned from her interdimensional journey. The building's unique properties seemed to make it easier for sensitive individuals to perceive the deeper structures of existence. Scientists working at the Institute had developed technologies that seemed like magic to previous generations, healing chambers that could repair cellular damage by manipulating the dimensional properties of DNA, communication devices that could reach consciousness existing in any reality, transportation portals that made space travel as simple as stepping through a doorway. But the most remarkable development was the emergence of the first fully interdimensional humans. These individuals, trained by Sarah and the Guardians, could maintain their consciousness simultaneously across multiple realities, serving as living bridges between different states of existence. They represented the next evolutionary step for humanity, beings capable of perceiving and interacting with the infinite complexity of the cosmic consciousness network. "We're not losing our humanity," Sarah assured concerned critics during a public appearance. "We're discovering what humanity was always meant to become. The Guardians have shown me that every conscious species eventually reaches this point in their development. We're simply joining a process that has been unfolding throughout the universe for eons." The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some humans couldn't adapt to the expanded awareness, experiencing psychological distress when confronted with the infinite nature of existence. Support systems had been developed to help these individuals process the overwhelming reality of interdimensional consciousness without losing their sanity. Emma Rodriguez, now 11 years old, had become a symbol of humanity's potential future. Her natural interdimensional abilities continued to develop, and she spoke casually about conversations with beings who existed as pure consciousness in realms of crystallized thought. To her, the miracle of interdimensional existence was simply another aspect of a reality that had always been far more wonderful and complex than most people realized. The Guardians say that consciousness is like a song that echoes through all possible realities. Emma explained to a group of amazed researchers, "Every thought and feeling creates ripples that spread across dimensions, connecting all living beings in patterns too beautiful for most people to see. But we're learning to see them now, and that means we can start singing along with the cosmic music." The sealed hangar where Sarah had once disappeared had become humanity's doorway to infinity. What began as a mysterious vanishing had evolved into the greatest adventure in human history, an ongoing journey of discovery that promised to reveal the true nature of consciousness, reality, and the magnificent complexity of existence itself. As Sarah stood in the transformed hangar, surrounded by equipment that bridged multiple dimensions and colleagues who were learning to transcend the boundaries of conventional reality, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought humanity to this threshold. Her disappearance had been not an ending, but a beginning, the first step in a transformation that would eventually touch every conscious being in the universe. The future stretched ahead like an infinite corridor of possibilities, each dimension offering new wonders to explore and new levels of understanding to achieve. Humanity was no longer alone in the cosmos, but part of a vast community of conscious beings working together to unlock the deepest mysteries of existence itself.